Hello, my name is John Antonakis and I'm Professor of Organizational Behavior at the Faculty of Business and Economics, HEC, at the University of Lausanne in Switzerland.
Hello, I'm Philippe Jacquard. I'm a Professor of Organizational Behavior at EM Lyon Business School in France.
Tuesday, 5 November 2024 is the day. So the million-dollar question is, who will win the US presidential election? Every 4 years, Philippe Jacquard and I have been giving a prediction on who we think is going to win. This prediction is based on an article we wrote in 2015 in the Academy of Management Journal, where we looked at how charisma and some macroeconomic variables and incumbency predict who will win the US presidential election. I will pass on to my co-author, Phil. So, Phil, can you walk us through the original prediction model? What did we measure? What do we predict? And what does this famous econometric equation mean?
So, John, what we built our model upon is the equation developed by Raymond Fair at the University of Yale, which is an econometric model of voting. This equation here shows how the democratic vote share of a two-party US presidential election vote can be predicted from macroeconomic variables and incumbency variables. This model really captures what we call attributional effects. In other words, voters observe the state of the economy, and dependent on their perception of how well the economy is doing, they either reward the incumbent candidate or his or her party, or punish the incumbent candidate or his or her party. The equation you see here predicts the democratic vote share of a two-party US presidential vote. In other words, we exclude any potential third-party candidates. So in this equation here, we have three variables capturing the state of the economy. G is a short horizon variable capturing GDP growth in the three first quarters of the election year. P captures the inflation rate since the beginning of the term of the current administration, and Z can be thought of as a good news variable. It counts the number of quarters for which the GDP growth was greater than 3.2%. Each of these three variables is multiplied by an indicator variable, I, which simply gives the direction of the effect, whether the state of the economy can be attributed to Democrats or to Republicans, depending on who the incumbent president is. We then have two variables capturing antagonistic effects of the incumbency. On the one hand, the incumbent candidate has an advantage by being a familiar face. This is variable deeper. And on the other hand, voters can become wary of having the same party in power for several terms. This is captured by a variable der. We then have an indicator variable coded 01, variable war, which captures the idiosyncratic effects of both world wars on the state of the economy of the United States and of the world in general.
So thank you, Phil. So as we saw from this famous equation from Raymond Fair at Yale University, the model predicts what is likely going to happen on the basis of incumbency, on the basis of macroeconomic factors. So that's very nice. Now, Phil, obviously we did something to extend this model. We added a few more parameters. What do they mean and why did we do it?
So what we did is we extended this equation to account for who the candidates are. In other words, we think it should matter who is running for office. What we did is we included measures of charisma for both candidates, and we tried to see how the difference in the charisma between both candidates will affect the outcome of the elections. Our theory is that when the signals that are predicted from the economy are rather weak, this is when charisma should matter. In other words, when the economy is doing very well, it shouldn't really matter how charismatic or how leader-like the different candidates are. If the economy is doing very poorly, similarly, it shouldn't matter very much who the candidates are. However, if it's not so clear how the economy is doing, if these signals from the economy are a little bit more fuzzy or more ambiguous, this is when the effect of charisma should kick in. So, John, now we've actually made an extension to the model we had before, and rather than predicting the two-party vote share, we decided to predict the Electoral College. Why is that?
You may have noticed that in the last couple of elections, one candidate may win the popular vote, but not the Electoral College. Now, this happens because there is a concentration of voters in certain large states, like, for example, California and New York, that disproportionately vote for the Democratic candidate. So in running different models and in trying to predict the election result, we realized that we are better off doing what actually happens, predict the electoral college share. So in the new model that we have been playing around with, we model who wins the electoral college and by how much. And this is now what our updated model is accounting for.
And we made another change to our model with respect to how we normalize charisma. John, can you explain first how we define charisma, how we measure it, and how we normalize it in this model here?
So charisma is symbolic, value-based, and emotion leader signaling. So signaling means sending information to reduce information asymmetries between a signaler and a person who receives the signal. Now, this information has to be costly so that it's credible. We've done research that actually shows that the charisma signal is not easy to produce, it's not easy to fake, so it does communicate some honest, or let's say reliable information about the competence of the candidates. So that's how we define charisma. We measure it through how the candidates speak. Now, we've done a lot of experiments and we have found that non-verbal behavior matters, but really what the cake of leadership is what you say. So the non-verbal is the glazing on the top. So we figured out that we can just use what the candidates say, and in fact, given that we go back to 1916 to calibrate the charisma model, in those days there was no recordings of voice or video. So what we've done to be consistent across all the elections is we look at the speeches from the Democratic and the Republican convention, the acceptance speeches of the candidates. So how do we measure it? Sentence by sentence, we code for the presence or absence of 9 charismatic leadership tactics. Those consist of framing the message, the use of symbolic communication means like metaphors, telling stories, using rhetorical questions, contrasts, lists and repetitions. And on the other hand, we look at the substance. The substance is what values are we defending, why, and can we emulate and amplify what the collective is thinking and feeling. That's what we call cognitive empathy, or expressing the sentiments of the collective. We have value-based statements, and then talking about high and ambitious goals and confidence to achieve them. So in the original model, what we did is we put in the raw charisma score, and we controlled for how long the speech was. Now, in the beginning, we noticed that some speeches were a bit longer, a bit shorter. In general, people spoke for about half an hour, so there was a kind of average length. But this year, Mr. Trump decided to deviate from his transcript, and he spoke for a very, very, very long time. So given that some candidates spoke for a very long time or had excessively long or short sentences, we created a charisma density score. We normalized it so that we can compare the two candidates to see how percentage-wise charismatic they are. It simplifies the model and also gives more stable predictions. So, Phil, now that we have explained the Raymond Fair model and our model, let's make some predictions. Before we get there, though, what assumptions do we make about the current economic situation, about the incumbency, in other words, who is considered the incumbent, and what does Ray Fair predict in terms of the vote share, and what do we predict in terms of the vote share?
So what values do we have for this model? For the short horizon variable G of GDP growth, we have a value of 1.7. For the inflation rate captured by variable P, we have a value of 4.54. The good news variable, number of quarters for which GDP growth was higher than 3.2%, we have a value of 4. This is a variable Z. Deeper, the incumbency variable is coded 0. Although the Democrats are in office, Biden is not running again, so strictly speaking, it's not the incumbent president that's running. The variable DER captures duration for which the current party has been in power, in this case 1 term, so the variable is coded 0. The variable I, which gives the direction of the state of the economy, is coded 1 because we're predicting Democratic vote share. Therefore, the current state of the economy should be attributed to the Democrats. And the variable war is coded 0. Looking at the econometric model of voting of Raymond Fair and taking into account that Harris is not considered as the incumbent here, what does this model predict? Well, what we predict here is a 50.67% vote share for Republicans. In other words, 49.33% for Democrats. Note, however, that the confidence interval is quite large, so the prediction falls somewhere in between 45.31% and 53.35%. So actually what we have here is a toss-up. Let's assume Fair is making a mistake and that Harris is actually able to leverage the incumbency advantage. What would happen if we would consider her as being the incumbent? Well, in this case, Fair's model would predict a 48.44% vote share for Republicans and a 51.56% vote share for Democrats. However, taking into account the confidence interval, which runs from 48.97% to 54.14% for Democrats, again, we have a toss-up. Now, John, given the issues you identify with modeling vote share, what does the Fair model predict when looking at the Electoral College?
Thanks for the question, Phil. Boy, I feel like we are wrestlers in a tag team coming on and off, but this is getting fun. So what does the Raymond Fair model predict if we have Electoral College votes as the outcome? The Democrats are set to get 265, and the Republicans 273. So again, the model is predicting a Republican victory. But again, I must stress that these point estimates traverse 50%. We do not have a definitive prediction. It could go either way, and all hinges on, as Phil said before, how we model incumbency. I guess the macroeconomic variables that we have are pretty accurate, but all is going to depend on how do the voters see Kamala Harris. Is she an incumbent? Or is she an outsider? Now, she's playing it kind of both ways, but we will discuss that at the end.
Okay, but how about the charisma of both candidates? Who is more charismatic in this current race?
Good question, Phil. Let's put this all into context. The average score for a Democratic candidate is 28.07%. That means when we go back to 1916 and we take the average of all Democratic candidates, the average Democratic candidate is here. How about the Republicans? Well, their average score is 26.67%. So this gives us a good baseline to compare where Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are on our charismometer. And as you can see here, Kamala Harris is at 49.22%, and Donald Trump just pips her at 52.92%. So Donald Trump has got an advantage insofar as charisma is concerned.
Wow. So what does the model predict when we factor in charisma?
Wow, that is correct. Because when we stick in the charisma difference between the two candidates, again, it points to a Republican victory. The Republicans should get approximately 295 Electoral College votes, and the Democrats 243. But again, I must stress that these numbers are not cast in iron. It could go either way. You're as good as flipping a coin on this election. Now, what if the electorate considers Harris to be an incumbent, and we make the same prediction considering the charisma difference between the two candidates? In this case, the Democrats win. They get 276 Electoral College votes, and the Republicans get 262. All right, the tag team is back in the ring together again. So, Phil, if you were a betting man, who would you put your money on, considering state of economy, considering the polls? You can consider whatever you want, betting markets. Who do you think is going to win?
It's a very good question, John. Actually, I think Harris is in a unique position where she can leverage the advantages of the incumbency while disassociating herself with any negative aspects of the Biden administration. So I think voters will perceive her as the incumbent, and therefore the model predicts a Democrat's victory. Harris will win. What about you, John? What do you think will happen?
How much money are you willing to bet on that?
How about a fine dinner?
We can do that, and I will also add the person who loses this bet jumps into Lake Geneva the day after the election, or soon thereafter.
You're on.
All right, Phil. So what do I think? It's a very complicated question, and I appreciate what you've just said. I do agree that there are things that Kamala can do to disassociate herself from the Biden administration, but still leverage the advantages of what the Biden administration did. Now, given that we had also predicted that Trump would beat Clinton, and given that it's a man running against a woman of color, I am not so sure that polls are as accurate as they should be. I would normally use the polls also to make an informed judgment. Our model obviously doesn't take into account the polls, but if you see state by state what's going on, it seems like Trump will probably win North Carolina. It seems that Trump will probably win Georgia. It seems that Trump will probably win Arizona. And do you agree that it's all going to hinge down to Pennsylvania? Now, where's it going right now? It's a toss-up in Pennsylvania if you look at the state polls. So I have to trust our model, and independent of who I want to win or what my judgment is, I'm putting my money on Trump. So that's all, folks. I hope to see you in 4 years from now. We will update you on LinkedIn to show you who won or who lost the bet. And thank you for listening to us. Bye.
Bye-bye.